And so one of those answers was, I will lift weights because I want to be stronger. Okay. Really, when you're losing. You don't see that even at all. We'll give it a second and see if it gets a little bit better. But people lift because they want to get stronger. People lift because they want bigger muscles. Okay. Those two things are not mutually exclusive of each other. They also lift, and this is a really important thing that is in so many ways beyond the scope of our class, but it's probably a thing that you guys are very interested in. They lift because they want better physical function. They want better sports performance or ability to function if you're an older adult by going up and down stairs, carrying groceries, whatever that's going to be. Okay. This is a very different sort of animal than simply I want to be stronger and I want to be bigger. Okay. We're going to focus mostly today on the physiology of what changes, why does it change, just of increase in strength, just of increase in muscle size. Okay. If you want to know more about those other ones, we got some other classes I can recommend. Okay. We are going to cover a couple of things. One of the big things that everybody needs to understand is what's the stimulus, okay? And by stimulus, I mean, what's the thing that drives changes and adaptations in muscle size and muscular strength, okay? You go and you train, something about what you're doing while you're lifting weights is going to be the driving stimulus. We'll then talk about what is it that stimulus changes, and then we'll try to a little bit of an extent to get into some of the underlying mechanisms of that change. Why does that stimulus actually change that thing in the way that it does? Right? What are some of the cellular processes that underlie, especially the increase in muscle mass? Okay. Okay. A couple of things to keep in mind as we do all of this that are kind of going to be in some ways related to prescribing exercise, but they're also really important for sort of understanding the role and the relationship between stimulus and what changes. And that's, first of all, is the idea of what we call training specificity. Training specificity means, okay, that if Destiny does push-ups, she's going to get better at doing push-ups. If Carly does squats, guess what she gets better at? It's squats, but squats are weird. You actually get better at everything. Squats kind of a lot. But seriously, like there's been a study. Do squats get better at shooting free throws in basketball? I don't understand. But there's data. Okay. So if you lift very, very heavy, guess what you get better at doing? Lifting very heavy. If you lift a lighter weight many, many times, guess what you get better at doing? Lifting a lighter weight many, many times. Maybe say she took Pilates class, guess what she got better at doing? Pilates, right? You got better with those muscles that you used during that class. So keep this in mind, okay? Because this idea leads right back into what is the stimulus we're going to provide, right? So if you start at the end and you think about what do I want to get out of this, right? I want bigger muscles. I want stronger muscles in this lift, in this range of motion, whatever that's going to be. Then you need to figure out, okay, well, if that's what I want, how would I train specific to that particular change and do that? Okay. All right. We mentioned this a little bit the other day. I think we talked about homeostasis. But when we talk about adaptation, what the neuromuscular system is going to try to do in response to resistance training is stop you from disrupting the balance or the homeostasis in your muscles at that given time. Okay? Your body is used to doing whatever you do very often. Okay? It becomes accustomed to that. It is in homeostasis when you do that. When you go and you exercise and you do a bout of resistance training, your goal needs to be, I want to disrupt the homeostasis in my muscles, in my metabolic system, in my cardiovascular system, whatever it's going to be. Okay? So again, it needs to be specific training to disrupt the homeostasis that I want, because then the adaptation that takes place is going to occur in an effort so that the next time, or a month from now, if you do it repeatedly, the next time you do that exact same bout of exercise, you get less of a disruption. So I lift and I tax my nervous system so that I'm making it generate a lot of force. It's not that great. That throws it out of homeostasis. I come back tomorrow and it remembers what we did. And so now I can lift that same weight. I'm going to get less disruption. Okay? The body doesn't like to be out of homeostasis. This also has really important implications for if you go and you train and you do the same thing day after day after day after day. See the people next door that do this, right? You all see them. You may have been these people. I've been this person at various times. You do the same thing. You get adaptations. You get better for a few weeks, and then it all stops because your body has adapted. There's no more disruption of homeostasis. So if you want to continue to see increases in strength, if you want to continue to see increases in muscle size, you have to change what you're doing. Okay. All right. I put this up here because to me, this is a way to think about all of the stuff we're going to talk about, right? You do some bout of exercise. That bout of exercise causes acute physiological change. Heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up. There's force that's going to be expressed across the membrane of the muscle. We're doing that entire signaling pathway from brain to muscle, right? It uses energy. All of these things happen. That leads to hormone releases, apparently, because I can't spell on all of this. But there's some acute changes. These changes are the thing that disrupts homeostasis. So these changes and that disruption are the stimulus. That stimulus then drives certain adaptations. If I do this over and over and over again, I will eventually get an adaptation. That adaptation may be bigger muscles, stronger muscles, a shift in fiber type, okay? Less metabolic disturbances. Those then look like what we think of as chronic changes or chronic adaptations to exercise. And the hope then is that these chronic changes will let us meet whatever our goal was from our training program. That's why the best way to do all of this is to approach it backwards. What's my goal? What do I want out of all? What am I trying to get? Okay. That will tell us then what is the chronic change that I need. And then you can work backwards. Okay, well, if this is where I want to get to, I need this thing to adapt or these things to adapt to get me there. So then let me figure out what the stimulus needs to be to drive that adaptation so I can get here. And so I have to train in a way that will give me that stimulus and not a different. And I imagine that all of you guys just intuitively get that. You intuitively understand all of this. But I want to give you a framework and kind of a way to sort of write it out and think about it in a little bit more linear manner so that you can try to understand a little bit about what's going on. Okay. What is our stimulus with resistance training? The primary resistance training stimulus is force. It's force. It is sometimes referred to as your load. It is also sometimes can be referred to as your training volume. All of it really comes down to you're making the muscle contract and generate force, usually over and over and over again. Okay? That force provides overload. Provides overload. Anybody do a lot of muscle contractions right now? So a lot of force being generated, like right now when you're sitting there? No, right? Normally, we don't generate that much force. So when you go and train and you generate more force, that's going to give us overload. Okay? That overload can be achieved by generating force by what exercises we choose to use. In a lot of instances, it's going to come down to the amount of weight that we lift. Okay. And then the interaction of that weight we lift with the number of sets and reps that we're going to undertake, the rest period, the order of exercises, right? And all of that's going to then get us back with our specificity. But the stimulus to drive adaptations with resistance training is force production. It's force production. You guys will see, I meant to pull this paper this morning to show you guys a graph, but the amount of force, the intensity or the heaviness of the weights that you lift are somewhat important, but they are not the end all be all. You can make your muscles bigger by lifting relatively lighter weights as long as you lift that weight enough times that you can't do any more reps. We call that going to failure. If you lift a lighter weight to failure, there is evidence that you will get roughly an equivalent increase in hypertrophy or an increase in muscle mass to lifting a heavier weight. If you want to maximize strength, you have to lift a heavy weight. Okay. If you want to maximize how much stronger you can get, you have to lift heavy. You must lift near your max. And you need to lift using the exercise that you want to get stronger at. Right? In July, let's just say there's going to be a powerlifting competition. I got a bench press, I got a squat, I got a power clean. Want to maximize your strength for that particular competition, right? Don't go and do deadlifts. Deadlifts might be somewhat helpful. Anyway, you got to go and lift those things. Right? But that's going to be our stimulus. That's what the stimulus is. Okay. All right. This is where we've already kind of hit some of this, right? 125 to 100% increase in strength on average. Right on the button for the most part with this. Who can increase their strength more? What person in class probably has the greatest capacity to increase your maximal strength? You don't lift. Very good. Okay. If you want to be on this 100% end, pick a lift that you don't ever normally do. Or just find somebody like just don't lift. Okay. If you've been lifting for a long time, you're already sort of sliding yourself towards that 100%. You cannot increase mass or strength into perpetuity. Okay? There's a limit. We'll talk about that in the coming slides. Generally, we see greater increases in concentric eccentric strength than we do in isometric strength. Okay? So if we have you do a squat, we can make your squat one rep max go up to a much greater extent than if we had you do an isometric sort of knee extension exercise. Or if we put you in the squat rack and we have you try to come up, we put so much weight on the bar that you can't move it when we measure it in the lab. Again, this comes down to neural adaptations where you're going to get better specifically at doing the thing that you're practicing. If you only train with isometric contractions, it'll make your isometric force go up to much greater. Right? We don't do a lot of isometric contractions in everyday life, but that's one of those ways to do that. Okay. Things that are sometimes misconceptions out there. Men and women, relatively equal increases in strength. Okay. Till the mid-1990s, we didn't realize this. Sorry, ladies. It never occurred to anyone to normalize the increase in muscle size or the increase in strength to your starting muscle size or starting strength. It was just, well, the guys can lift 50 more pounds and the girls can lift 30 more pounds. So clearly the guys have a greater capacity to increase their strength. One of the first things that ever did that was done by my department chair at the University of Georgia before I got there. And he would tell us stories about this class. He was like, yeah, we were just dumb. We didn't know what we were doing. Didn't occur to anybody. Okay. So similar gains between older people and young people. right? From a similar starting place, I can increase my strength just as much as you guys. Your grandparents or my parents can increase theirs roughly the same. Okay? So no real differences based on sex or age. But they really, really are related to how strong are you initially. And then as you guys will see, there is some level of genetic. Some of you have good genes for being resistant to pain responding. Some of you don't. There are two components. There's nervous system changes, primarily in motor unit recruitment and firing rates. And then there's what we call contractile protein adaptations. And that is my muscles get bigger. Okay? My muscles get bigger. All right, so let's work our way through these things just a little bit. I promised you guys data. I want to be that asshole, but if you tell me something like, is there data to support that? Right? I'm that guy on Twitter, right? Here is a study that was published in 2005. Almost 600 participants, equally split between men and women. Okay, they did 12 weeks of single arm bicep curl training, 3 days per week. First month they did 3 sets of 12. Second month they did 3 sets of 8. The third month they did 3 sets of 6. Okay. What we see, this is 1 RM bicep curl 1 rep max. And then this is isometric force, so an isometric contraction at 90 degrees of elbow flexion. Dynamic strength, right? Men, women, on average, about a 50% increase. A little bit more in the women. Why do we think the women got a little more of an increase in strength? Guess who curls less? Ladies. Okay. Isometrically, they're much, much closer. Okay. This is our strength increase. Having 600 people, this is a really, really large study. Most resistance training studies, if you're lucky, it's a very, very large scale study. That's why I say these are data that I have a lot of confidence in. Okay, a lot of confidence in. All right, let's talk about how do you get stronger. The first way that you get stronger, the one that occurs the fastest, as little as 1 bout, okay, are changes in the nervous system and how it tells the muscles to contract. These are sometimes called learning effects. You guys know the idea, right? You never learn. Once you've learned how to ride a bike, you never forget. That's a neural adaptation. It's like,
all my for you days, like you didn't skip. That's been all my I did talk.
wait, what?
Like people ask their parents, like, do you remember how to skip? And like they just can't do it.
No, let's not. Let me go home and practice and make sure that I remember. Because Ellis comes home some days and she thinks that she's skipping, but she's really not. Think about that. Yeah, I probably could skip. But those are what we call learning effects. Okay? Learning effect. This idea that the muscle remembers. It's really not the muscle that remembers. It's the nervous system. It's your motor cortex, right? It's the cerebellum, and it's your muscle spindles, it's your Golgi tendon organs, it's the motor neurons in the spinal cord. The nervous system remembers how we do these activities, right? How many motor units do I need? How many muscles are contracting? What's the optimal kind of thing to do with all of this? Okay, so what changes? I'm going to tell you guys that we don't really know. That's a little bit of a generalization. We know some things that change. Okay, we know that we get better at recruiting the highest threshold, largest motor unit. Of all the things, right, Kyle might have a hard time doing right now if he's going to do an activity that he's not used to doing is recruiting those largest motor units, type 2X file, right? He can recruit 85% of his motor units, no problem, but he can't get that last 15%. So that's the place where a lot of this stuff is going to come in. Okay? We increase something called synchronization of firing. It would probably take me 5 hours to explain what this actually means to you guys and to show you evidence of this. But what happens with synchronization is, let's say you've got 1,000 motor units in your quad muscles that are all firing at the exact same time. If you get good at doing synchronized motor unit recruitment, it's not just that they're all turned on at the same time. It's that you can actually make the action potentials going to each of them line up right on top of each other. And it's like, you guys ever been like, ever been inner tubing or anything like at the lake? Or you've been out like in the ocean? And you see two waves that come together, and sometimes they come together and they cancel each other out. And sometimes they come together if you catch the wavelength just right and they add together. So when we get synchronized motor unit firing, the action potentials all line up on top of each other, and you get like this wave-like sort of firing pattern. You get more force. Okay? The easier way to think about it, not on the exact motor unit level, is that what you get is I get all the units on at the same time from my agonist muscles and my synergist muscles, right? Like I can get everything that I need going at just the sequence. That's what we're going to see. We can sometimes see an increase in firing frequency. It depends upon the muscle. It depends upon the task. It's really hard for us to measure firing rates in intact human muscle. We get a little bit of stuff in low force contractions in like the small muscles in your hand, and we see a little bit. We don't know for sure how much that translates to very, very high force contractions in big muscles, but we think we can make firing rate go up. We also get decreased inhibition from Golgi. Fun fact. Who's done squats? Like free weight squats? Anybody? Get in the squat rack, put a really fucking heavy weight on there, right? Take it off the rack and just stand there. All you gotta do is stand there. More weight than you could ever squat back up, just stand there with it. Okay? Do that 3 times a week for several weeks, you'll get stronger. You've never lifted it, you've just held it off the rack. And you get stronger because having that very, very heavy weight on there and not completely ripping your quads in half, you'll turn down the inhibition from high forces that you get from the Golgi. So we think this is a way that we adapt this way. Okay? You're taking some of the safety, the governor or the safety mechanism off of your muscle. Happens really quickly, happens well before any increase in cross section. This is another problem for exercise prescription. Okay? Who remembers the first time you ever lifted weights and would like to share that experience with us? Anybody? Anybody remember? How do you remember?
Yeah.
Did you get a lot stronger really fast? No? You talk to your coach. Who's having you do things? All right, well, that ruined my entire exam. It's okay. One of the things that we see, right, if it takes a long time for muscles to get bigger, that's bad for exercise prescription. Right? People want results right now. The other problem is you take a naive lifter, you have them lift, and they get a lot stronger in like 2 weeks, right? I went from lifting 100 pounds to 130 pounds in like 2 weeks. And they think this is how much stronger I'm going to get all the time. And then it kind of comes up and it levels off, and you're struggling to get like 5 more pounds in that way. Okay. So it changes quickly, but it kind of comes up, and then it will really begin to kind of level out, and you get this little slow kind of. Okay. It's very, 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 I cannot emphasize this enough, very specific to exercise type. If you do free weight squats, you're going to get a neural adaptation to be better at doing free weight squats. That might be a little bit helpful at doing like a seated knee extension, because you do a lot of knee extension when you do a squat, but not nearly as much. Okay. Neural adaptations is where a lot of the specificity comes. Nervous system gets better at doing whatever you're asking it to do. If you don't want to have pharmacological help, if you don't want to take steroids, increasing neural adaptations is the last way that very advanced resistance trainers can get stronger. You may have reached your genetic potential on muscle size, okay? And all you've got left to squeeze that last 2 or 3 or 5% out of your strength is neural adaptation. That's why you see very, very advanced lifters or people training for powerlifting competitions doing weird shit. They're trying to find a new way to overload their nervous system doing the same lift they've been doing for very, very long. But they're going to work an accessory muscle that's part of that lift and those kinds of things because they basically maxed out everything. Okay? Okay, another cool effect. Anybody participate in my grad student Richard's thesis project? Nobody did. Okay. Well, we were looking at a thing that is related to this. It's called the crossover effect. The nervous system is really cool. Do curls with your right arm gets stronger, so does your left arm. Never lifted a weight, and it gets stronger. It's about half as much as the arm that you're actually working. This is called the crossover effect. Okay? One of the coolest things for doing rehabilitation in people who have had strokes, ACLs, all of that. Train their good side. Their bad side also will get stronger. Lift a heavy weight with your good side. Bad side is not prepared for that yet, right? You can maintain those things. Or it's going to be in a cast. Work the good side. It's called the crossover effect. And so the neurons that control lifting on one side sit in very close proximity to the neurons that control the other side. And the brain remembers in some ways what that pattern is. And it can more easily recreate that pattern because those neurons are all firing very soon. Okay? Really wild, really crazy. 2 years ago, and I think that we haven't published, we did isometric plantar flexion for a month. We had people come in 5 days a week for a month. And they did 6 sort of maximal contractions for 10 seconds. We made in a month, we made the leg that never got trained, got 50% strong. The leg that trained got like 70%. Okay. You can do some crazy things with this crossover. So it's really cool. Okay. In the next few slides, I'm going to treat you guys like graduate students. I'm going to show you a little bit of data on how we know the things that I just told you about. Okay? Just because I want you guys to be exposed to a little bit of it. This is data on how we would measure in the lab, on how we would measure motor. These are just people, you've got a training group and you've got a control group, you've got before they trained, right? And then they did 8 weeks of training here in the white. And we're seeing that before they train, these people could contract about 85% of the motor neurons that could get them to fire in their quads. After training, they were at about 95%. Okay. You guys remember when I put the stimulator on myself the other day? We measure this by, you come to the lab, we say kick as hard as you can, and we just blast your leg with E-stim while you're kicking and see if we can get any more force out of it. And that tells us, are there some motor units that you're not able to practice? Okay. It's not always the most pleasant to do. In the control group, it was just 8 weeks. They tested them twice, right? No real increase or anything else. These are some of the ways that we know. Motor unit recruitment increases with training. Very, very, very commonly found type of thing. Okay. I want to show you guys this one. This is that same kind of information that I showed you guys where dynamic strength goes up way more than isometric strength. 12 weeks of training. Here's the weights that people were using while they were training over 12 weeks. So this is how much weight I'm squatting over 12 weeks, right? It went up like 170%. Okay. These people were very naive. Never done a squat before. You can sometimes see larger increases in strength when you do compound lifts and things like that, where people are not very accustomed to it. Okay. Isometric strength went up. The scale's kind of weird, but isometric strength went up about 25 or 30%. Okay. Again, specificity of training. These were a different study, but kind of out of the same group. This is they had them train at fast and slow velocities. When I train using a fast velocity, guess what I get better at doing? Training with a fast velocity, right? So here's fast velocity training, 240 degrees per second. Okay, this is like half-second contractions. It's real fast. Okay, they don't get particularly a lot of adaptations at these slower velocities. They get all their adaptation out here. Here, when you train at kind of what we normally think of as at about 90 degrees per second, they're getting a lot of increases at slower velocities, not a lot at fast, but kind of a little bit here. Okay. Again, specificity of training. Specificity of training. Let me do like one more and then we'll take a little break. I didn't put this in the list, but I probably need to add it. Okay. One of the other things that we get that we know causes an increase in strength is this is a paper where they looked at if we train you over 8 weeks, we have you do knee extension training, and we look at the co-activation of hamstring muscles while you're doing knee extension. So I'm doing a kick out. How much are my hamstrings resisting against that kicking out? And what they found was there was about a 5% reduction within the first couple of weeks, right? This decrease in hamstring coactivation. So one of the other ways that you get stronger, one of the other neural adaptations is not just in the muscle you're lifting, but it's in the antagonist. You turn off what you get, what the muscle's having to overcome is coming out of the antagonist. It still blows my mind that it was like 1992 before they figured this out. Okay. It just kills me in these ways. So you get better able at recruiting the motor units in the agonist muscle. You turn off recruitment in the antagonist. And you get better, whatever velocity you train, you get better doing whatever range of motion you train. Okay? Really, really key kind of concepts and ideas. All right, one last little thing. This used to be a big fight 20 years ago when I was doing more resistance training. I don't know if it is now. Anybody get mad? People like, dude, you got to lift free weights. Don't use machines. You got to use dumbbells. Don't use barbells. Anything? Nobody. We're just like get in there and lift. Nobody cares. Okay. It used to be a bigger thing. Should I do, if I want to train my biceps, should I train each arm individually or should I do them simultaneously? Okay. And there were some studies that looked at some of this. And what you can see basically is we have bilateral 1 rep max. So using both arms to do a curl or both legs to do knee extension here. And then unilateral strength. They had a group that trained using both or a group that trained doing each one separately. I know we're shocked, right? When you train using both at the same time, your strength doing that goes up to a greater extent. Strength doing dumbbell, and then you see basically the opposite when you do it the opposite. Okay. Again, I think this is really, really important, and it's kind of beyond the scope of this class, but it's really important for if you want to play a sport, or if you have to do a certain activity, how often do you, right? How often do you do things when you're making both arms or both legs go at the same time? How often do you do things, right, where you're going to do something while you're balancing here and waving one arm over your head or whatever else? So there's something to be said about this would be the idea of what's called functional training. Functional training is not I'm on a freaking BOSU ball trying to balance while I do something. That's not how you get really strong. But it is in some ways the idea of try to make what you do look like and mimic the activities that you undertake in your job. Okay. Let's take a break, guys, for about 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll get into talking about some of the changes that take place. Okay. Now, Let's talk about getting big. Or more or less how not big you're gonna get. What are the limits to those things? Okay. So remember, when your muscles get bigger, what you are doing is you are adding actin and myosin. That's the protein that we're going to add. When you add actin and myosin, you get more sarcomeres. Those sarcomeres get hooked together, so you get more myofibrils. More myofibrils in a single muscle fiber will make that fiber get bigger. So I will start by saying this. When you train and you make your muscles bigger, you do not get more muscle fiber. Okay? You do not add muscle fibers. As far as we know, as long as you're not taking steroids. What happens is the existing fibers that you have swell up and get bigger by adding sarcomeres and adding myofibrils inside. Okay? This may be one of the genetic limits that gets placed on why your muscles can't get super duper big, or why some people can get bigger muscles than others. What if genetically you have a lot of smaller fibers to start with? Maybe you have greater potential than somebody that has genetically fewer muscle fibers that were already starting off. We don't know. Okay? But that's what happens. More actin and myosin, more sarcomeres, more myofibrils, bigger fibers, more force. Okay? More CSA, more force, more cross bridges. We can see changes in a muscle biopsy in sort of myosin heavy chain, right, expression very, very quickly. After just a couple of bouts, we can see an upregulation of you're starting to make more myosin. But the thing is that you have to imagine that there are millions, if not hundreds of millions of actin and myosin molecules in a given muscle. And so just seeing things get upregulated, it's going to take a while to make enough new things for it to be visually, sort of appearance-wise or measurable from an increase in size. So we say 6 to 8 weeks if you've got really, really good resolution imaging, MRIs, CT scans. There was a study that one of our former faculty here did. They saw some stuff in about 4 weeks. We have a CT machine downstairs. Stick your leg or your arm in it. And it takes like one cross section. Very, very high resolution with that. They could see stuff in about 4 weeks. Okay, but it's very, very small. But for you guys to notice, it would be like a change. Wait, those little things. Just stay 6 to 8 weeks. Okay. We say how big can you get, right? We said 5 to about 40%. I'll show you guys the cross-sectional area data from the biceps curl, the 600-person study in a minute. That's where that number mostly comes from. There are some people that can get more than that. And there are some people that can get nothing. We know there is a genetic component. We know this. I'll show you some data on it. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we think some of those genetic things that may play a role in that are. But one of the problems we run into with trying to understand all of the things that happen with hypertrophy, especially in people, is one, it's hard to measure. It's hard for us to match diet and exercise intensity across people. You're all already genetically different. Then there's the problem of steroids. Okay. It is unethical for me to do a research study and give you steroids. Okay. I can't do that. It's been done a couple of times. There's a couple of papers. They're both published in probably the best journal in the world. It's called the New England Journal of Medicine, where they gave people steroids. Get steroids, you get testosterone, sit on the couch, and you get real big. You get testosterone and you resistance train, there may not be a limit. We don't know. You get ginormous, really, really fast. Very, very powerfully anabolic. We'll talk about testosterone in a few slides. Okay. So this is the problem. When you see people on TikTok, when you go to Steel or your gym and you see these men and women that are very, very big, very muscular, very lean. I'm not saying they're all taking steroids, but I like my chances. there's a limit. People don't naturally look like that most of the time. If you look at fitness magazines and you see these things, right? I had a student bring something a couple of years ago, and it was in a magazine called Muscle and Fitness, and it was some guy that had won like Mr. Universe or something. It's like, I do 16 sets of 2 on curls. That's my magic secret for giant arms. I'm like, no, his magic secret is steroids, right? When you take the testosterone, it doesn't matter what you do. I can do 16 sets of 2 all day long, and I'm not going to look like it, right? So we have to be very, very careful about how we interpret things and kind of what people are telling us with all of this, okay? So here's the data on cross-sectional area in the bicep. So how big is our cross-section? 600-ish people. This was assessed via MRI, as high resolution imaging as we can get, okay? So sorry for the grad students that had to circle all of those images, but we've got, okay, men in black, women in white, roughly similar. Here's our nice kind of normal distribution curve, right? Between about 10 and 20% is about where everybody is. Like 2/3 of our people are right. Okay? That's what most of you can get. If you go from, I don't do a lot, that's about where you can get. Okay? That's not something to be scoffed at. That's a significant increase. Okay? It's a noticeable increase if you want bigger muscles. Okay? That's about where we are. Much more than that, you know, there's a few people that are out in that 50% range, but not very, very many. So how do we get bigger muscles? We're going to dive into the cellular stuff that goes on. Muscles are water and protein. They're water and protein. If you want bigger muscles, you have to put more protein into those muscles. How do you do that? Oh, way back to freshman biology. You guys remember talking about something called protein synthesis? Talk about transcription and translation and making proteins, right? There are genes and things in the nucleus. They're going to send messenger RNA to the ribosomes. We're going to hook amino acids together and get protein. Well, when you resistance train, you are going to shift what is happening with protein synthesis in your muscle. Okay? We need to shift the balance of what we call anabolism and catabolism from a protein standpoint in your muscle. Anabolism means higher synthesis rate. Catabolism means higher breakdown or degradation. So if you want to get more protein someplace, the net balance of how much am I making versus how much am I breaking down needs to shift. That's what resistance training will do for us. Okay? Or at least that's what resistance training plus making sure you're eating a sufficient amount of protein to have amino acids available. So we're going to figure out what the hell controls anabolism and catabolism. How does resistance training have some effects on these things? Right? I'm going to give you guys a little bit of flavor. It's not the whole story. Okay? We don't know the whole story, but it's very complicated. Okay? Very complicated. I can give Brock some protein right now and make his protein, the anabolism in his muscles go up. I can feed him every day when we have class like this. His muscles won't get any bigger, right? So it's not just simple enough that we can drive anabolism. I'll show you guys some data from, you do one bout of resistance training and you get this shift in protein synthesis. It's like 100% increase. Nobody gets 100% bigger. It doesn't always translate exactly. So it's a complicated process. Okay? And that's this idea that some of our acute responses, things we measure after one bout, like the day after you've done one bout of resistance training, are going to look a little bit different. Signals look a little bit bigger than what you actually get if you do that for months on end. Okay? That's what we're going to try to get at and understand. Okay. Actually see. I wonder if I plug this thing in, it would work. No, of course not. Okay. You're not gonna have to remember much about transcription and translation, okay? It's just, here's the cartoon version of all of it. This is a nucleus. You have DNA in your nucleus. When you want to make a protein, you open up DNA, right? And you make RNA. DNA to RNA has that genetic code to tell a ribosome to make this particular protein. So DNA to RNA is called transcription. You're transcribing the genetic code. That then gets released out of the nucleus, it floats around in the cytosol, it bumps into a ribosome. That ribosome then is going to grab amino acids and it's going to translate the messenger RNA, okay, into a sequence of amino acids that make whatever protein we want. So in our instances, we need to make more actin, more myosin, more titin, more nebulin, all of those other structural proteins, basement membrane proteins, to let us have more sarcomeres and more myofibrils and bigger fibers. Okay. All right. When muscles get bigger and you're in a positive protein balance, so when anabolism predominates, we call that a positive protein balance. Some people may call it a positive nitrogen balance. There's nitrogen in a lot of amino acids. You can measure nitrogen in your urine and see if you're actually excreting some. That means you're probably in a positive nitrogen balance, which means you probably got enough protein. When you're in a positive protein balance, we're going to get what we call hypertrophy, bigger muscles. Muscles hypertrophy, they get bigger. When you are in a negative protein balance for a prolonged period of time, you may get what's called atrophy, which is muscles shrinking. Okay? Hypertrophy takes a long time. Atrophy does not. Okay? I can put you guys in a cast, put you on bed rest, and within a week, your muscle will have gotten smaller. Okay? Within a week. Had me in health and fitness, I will sometimes tell the story. One of the other projects, so the guy that I did my PhD with used to work at NASA before he came to us. And he was one of the guys that tried to figure out if we're going to send you guys into space, what happens to your muscles and how we make it less bad. And so we got contacted by a drug company. They thought they had a drug that could prevent muscle atrophy, which would be fabulous, right? You could prevent sarcopenia and aging. And so we had a ground-based way of mimicking space flight. Giant platform shoe on your right foot. You're like 8 inches tall on your left, and give you some crutches, and your left leg just swings around like this. You went around for a month, and when you would sit down, you'd prop your leg up. You get up in the middle of the night to go pee, you got to hop. No weight bearing on one leg for a month. We pay people $1,000. Do this. Calf muscle, quad muscle. Quad got about 14% smaller in a month. Calf got almost 20% smaller in a month. Okay, in a month. At 2 weeks, it was about 8%. But within 2 weeks, you've lost almost 10% of your muscle mass just from doing nothing. Okay. Side note: everybody was like, "We would never do that again for $1,000. There's no way. It's not nearly enough." Okay, on all of those things. So hypertrophy takes 6 to 8 weeks. Atrophy takes a very, very short time. They send folks into space and their muscles will atrophy in like 3 days in space. So it's pretty crazy. Which should illustrate what we will talk about in a minute, that there's something magic about load. There's something magic about force production and its ripple effects on the sarcolemma and everything else. Because you can still contract. There's just nothing to contract against. There's no real load that's. All right, how do we balance, or how do we regulate protein balance? Well, hormones, to an extent, play a role in all of this. Diet matters. Mechanical loading, so force production, matters. Weirdly, stretch matters. When you get put in a cast, whatever muscle gets casted at a long, stretched out length doesn't atrophy. Weird. When we do look at resistance training, if you do concentric eccentric contraction versus just doing concentric, the concentric eccentric, because it has the stretch, you get bigger, more hypertrophy. And very, very strange kinds of things. There's some evidence that metabolic stress, that working the muscle to fatigue, right? May do that and nervous system activity. You need to fire the nervous system. You need to stimulate the neuromuscular junction and some of those kinds of things. There's some combination of all of these things that happen. Okay. That's how we regulate protein balance. Okay. All right, let's look at some data. I like this. This is fun. Okay. Here is one bout of resistance training. This comes out of one of the best muscle physiology labs in the world. Okay. They measure this by running an arterial and a venous catheter and infusing people with amino acids. Then they take muscle biopsies to see how much of it is actually getting taken up in the muscle. So it's some wild shit. Really, really cool though. One bout of exercise. This is the change in myofibrillar protein with FSR stands for fractional synthesis rate. This is basically the change in protein synthesis. Okay. Here's their resting rate. You do one bout of resistance training. Here it is at 6 hours. There's 1 day out, 2 days out, 3 days out. They see changes. You can see an increased protein synthesis rate in those muscles for 3 to 4 days. Okay, 3 to 4 days. And you will note, right, that we're at about 0.4, which doesn't mean much here at rest, and it's about 3 times that day after. Fairly significant changes. It will go up and stay up for several days. Okay. Degradation rates are also going to go up in the midst of this. So this is anabolism. You can measure catabolism as well. Degradation also goes up, so the net balance is not quite as pretty as all of this. But we will see increases from one bout of exercise in protein synthesis rates for several days. So the idea is, I train today, I take tomorrow off, I train the day after, right? So I'm still here, and I train again, and I get this again. And you do this over and over and over and over and over and over again. And you can make this increase in rate stay elevated for weeks and months at a time, and that's how we're going to manage to get bigger muscles. Okay? This one bout, it goes up. This is negligible from an increase in muscle size. Okay? It's negligible. And we now know some of this depends upon if you eat protein, when you eat protein, or if you eat protein and you eat carbohydrate in the midst of all of this as well. Okay. So I told you guys, slide probably would have been better earlier, but I told you guys when we started a few minutes ago that you do not get more fibers. Okay, we think. Julia, how would I know how many muscle fibers you have in your muscle? How can I measure that? Any ideas? You take a biopsy, okay? How big is a biopsy in comparison to the rest of your muscle? Really small. So I take a biopsy and I count the fibers in the biopsy, and then we have you train for 12 weeks. I take another biopsy. And I have any idea if you've gotten more fibers or not? Probably not, right? Because I'm getting a little tiny piece of one muscle of all of the things that you're working with. So it's almost impossible for us to do this. We know things about muscle fibers and muscle fiber number in humans from cadavers. Again, some poor grad student has to dissect it and tease out every fiber and count that shit. Okay? So, could I figure out I have to kill you, count your fibers, bring you back to life, train you, kill you again, count them again? Okay? Kind of a really difficult thing for us to do. If we look in animal models, rats, cats, mice, the things we do to animals, right? We train them, we kill them, they're all genetically identical. It's a necessary thing. Why I do human research, not animal research. My wife would not let me come. And so the idea of what's called hyperplasia, the idea that fibers will take one fiber, will split to two, and they both grow, you can get bigger. There's a little bit of evidence that this happens in animals. Very, very little in humans. Okay? Very little in humans. Don't worry about what the graph is sort of saying, but what we tend to see in animals is if you do something called chronic stretch, okay? A chronic stretch kind of overload to do these things. They take the muscle, they put the rat to sleep, They open its leg up, they cut its muscle, they stretch the tendon, and attach it in a different place so it stretches the muscle out. And it's just stretched. And then they sew it back up, they wake the rat up, and they say, okay, go on about your life. They come back, right? And it's like Pilates on steroids or something in those ways. Lots and lots of stretch. That chronic stretch seems to potentially induce some hyperplasia, more so than exercise and some other kinds of things. So maybe in us, if we could do chronic stretch, we could get there, but we can't really ethically do that either. So we don't think we split in people. If you take steroids, though, you probably get hyperplasia. That may be one of the things that we think happens. They've done some looking at bodybuilders and the way that when you took steroids, they do seem to have higher. Okay. So if they don't split, here's what happens. Okay. You go from this to this. Fiber that looks like this when it starts, and then it gets bigger. And what happens is you add active myosin, you add sarcomeres, you add myofibrils, and it just swells out that one individual fiber. This tends to happen in sort of a two-phased or a two-pronged approach. Okay. During the initial increase, as you drive protein synthesis, the fiber gets bigger, okay, but you don't add nuclei. Don't add nuclei. This is what's called phase 1 hypertrophy in fibers. Then, as the fiber gets bigger, it gets so big that the number of nuclei that it has cannot supply, it can't supply all the stuff that it needs. So then we begin to add additional myonuclei. Okay? If you don't get the myonuclear addition, the fiber will not be able to continue to get bigger. Again, this may also be one of the things that limits us genetically. Each of us may only have a certain capacity to increase nuclei in our muscle. You guys aware there's a concept in cell physiology called the surface area to volume ratio? Okay. There's a reason that we don't see like horror movie giant one-celled bacteria, right, that are as big as this room. A giant amoeba just like coming around like eating. Okay? And that's because if it's huge, it has all of this surface area, all of this volume in one nucleus. It can't make enough stuff in the nucleus to support being that big. And so it's the same idea in the muscle fibers, that as the fiber gets to a certain size, it needs more nuclei to be able to continue to supply enough protein, enough neurotransmitter, all the things. So there's this kind of two-tiered phases of doing all of this. Okay? There may be some role, we don't really know, but there may be some role in this addition of myonuclei that is controlled by those satellite cells, that are controlled by the muscle cells. Okay? It may play some. This is kind of this idea of you're going to get protein synthesis and you're going to get myofibrillar increase, more actin, more myosin, then you've got to add nuclei. Okay. This is a controversial idea. I'm going to give it to you guys anyway. So, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, right? Remember, type 1 destiny, type 2X destiny. Who's stronger, right? In the midst of all of this? Well, one of the other things that people talk about is, does your fiber type, is that one of the genetic things that determines how big your muscles are? And we look at this and we think, who knows what an Olympic sprinter looks like? How muscular are Olympic sprinters? They're big, right? They're very now. Some of them are just taking steroids. If you want to know what that looks like, Google Ben Johnson 1998 Olympics. You want to see a dude jacked up on some horse steroids and Winstrol and those things. But people will look at that and they will say, well, you've got more type 2 fibers, you have a greater capacity to hurt you. And the data are a little controversial on all of this. Okay? We'll start with this. When you have 2X fibers and you do resistance training, they turn into 2X. That's a known adaptation. 2X become 2X. Okay, so these people train, these are from biopsy data. You can see this is the sort of size of these things. They didn't really have very many 2X's to begin with. There's not a whole lot happening. Okay. All of your muscle fibers will increase in size. Okay. When you resistance train, they will all increase in size. But when we look at the data, if we look at this, here's ones, here's 2A's. The 2A's get bigger than the ones. Proportionally from where they start, 2A's tend to hypertrophy more than ones. One way to interpret this is 2A fibers hypertrophy more than ones. Okay? They have a bigger capacity. It's one way to interpret it. Maybe it's true. The other way to interpret it is, okay, Emma, stand up for me. What muscle fibers did she use to stand up? Which fiber types in the muscles did she use? Which ones did you use? Slow twitch. You used the type 1s, okay? You do lots of low force contractions all the time. You use your type 1 fibers all the time. You don't always use your 2s. So maybe what has happened is your type 1s have already hypertrophied. They've hypertrophied from walking around, from standing up, from doing these low force contractions. And so the reason that it looks like they don't have the same capacity, because they already have it. So there's two ways to kind of look at all of this. Okay? But we do know that if we do training, we do see some increases in both. Okay? In both. Okay. Now, you guys think you can memorize this by Monday? Okay. This is an intracellular signaling pathway that tries to represent, I don't know, like 80% of the things that we knew 12 years ago about all of the potential intracellular signals associated with making muscles get bigger. Okay. I'm going to have us focus on this little area in the red right here. But if you look up here on the top, this is a muscle fiber, and you can see here's a receptor for a thing called myostatin that we'll talk about. Here it's going to talk about mechanical signals, so load on those muscles, right? Contractions doing various things, insulin receptors, insulin-like growth factor that we'll talk about, more androgens, so testosterone, growth hormone, right? There's this thing called Wnt signaling. All of these different things are going to all work together. Like I told you guys, it's fucking complicated. There's a lot of stuff that's going on. We're going to focus, though, on what we think of as the kind of primary regulatory hub in the cell that, when it gets turned on, regulates and really drives an increase in muscle fiber. And that is going to be this area right here, and it involves a molecule called mTOR. Okay? mTOR stands for the mammalian target of rapamycin. Mammalian target of rapamycin. Rapamycin is an antibiotic. Okay. So one of the things that happens when we get the binding of anabolic hormones, when we get muscle contractions, okay, when we remove myostatin, everything seems to get sort of signaled down and filtered through this mTOR area here. And then activation of mTOR drives the increase in protein synthesis. Okay. So we'll come back to some of the stuff we know about mTOR. We're going to talk about hormones for just a second before we start. Okay. You all have anabolic. All right, what's happening? Y'all got a thing that I didn't, so what are y'all signed up? Just like everybody who lives in Houston, there's a tornado in Houston or something? Huh?
Yeah.
Okay. I still get phone calls from Oxford, Mississippi. Every time there's like weather there, the phone gets blown up. So, okay. All of you have anabolic hormones. I should probably put estrogen on here as well, ladies, y'all don't have a lot of testosterone, but you have some. But in a lot of instances, estrogen will replace some of the effects of that. So what do we know about testosterone, growth hormone, and then a really cool one called insulin-like growth factor? Testosterone is probably the single most powerfully anabolic hormone or entity thing that we can do or give you. Okay, that one I got. Okay, so broken our concentration. What do we know about testosterone? How do we study testosterone? I can't give you testosterone. How am I going to know what it can do from an anabolic standpoint? What would be a natural thing to do? Who doesn't have a lot of testosterone? This guy, probably. I'm getting to that age. So I'll tell you yesterday, did you know that men, when you become, if you have a kid, your testosterone goes down. In little boys who have an involved father, also part of the study that was around, when they have kids, they have less testosterone. Things like that. So kind of a wild with behavioral and some physiology together. Why might I have less testosterone than the other guys in the classroom? I'm aging, right? I'm screaming towards andropause at an alarming rate. Okay. I'm sorry, guys, for all the rest of you in here. Y'all have probably already peaked in your testosterone. Peaked in your weight. Probably. You're already on the down slide. Okay. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. But you're past your prime. So, one of the things that we have done to study the effects of testosterone on muscle is we can look at testosterone levels, or what happens when we give men who have undergone andropause, or men that have low testosterone, called hypogonadal, right? Men that don't have as much as a normal age-appropriate person. If we supplement them with testosterone back to what we would think of as a level, okay? Drive by any strip mall, there's a male enhancement clinic. I am about to be sitting right in their target demographic. You want to watch something? Anybody watches golf, watch the PGA tournament that's going on right now, the PGA Championship they're playing. You will know who their target audience is by the commercials. There'll be commercials for erectile dysfunction drugs. There'll be things for expensive cars, investments, life insurance, and other forms of like male. Their target is old, wealthy white men, right? I hate to say that, but that's what it is. You watch football, beer commercials, right? And you know who they think is going to watch by what they show you. Beer commercials, truck commercials. Okay. Anyway, if we look at hypogonadal men and we give them testosterone back, relatively normal thing. I can go to the doctor, they can test my testosterone. I say, oh, well, you're down. Go to this clinic, we'll write you a prescription, they'll give you testosterone and get me back to kind of a regular regulation. With a level, okay? Then you do that and you just take extra and you see what happens. If we give a physiological dose to hypogonadal men, they get about a 15% increase in muscle mass and about a 15% increase in food. They don't have to work out, they have to do anything. We just give them the testosterone and ramp them up a little bit, and it drives this. As I've said, if we supplement in eugonadal men, maybe about a 20% increase thereabouts with no training, only been a couple of studies. When we do it with resistance training, we know we're going to get even better. Growth hormone is also a very popular thing for the Reuters to take, right? Usually you take testosterone and growth hormone together. It's called stack when you do these sorts of things. What do we know about that? Well, Again, same thing. We look at people that have sort of pituitary issues and make extra growth hormone, big, they grow, the bones grow. You want to know if an athlete is taking growth hormone, see if their hat size gets bigger, see if their feet get bigger. Okay? Ladies, hope you like your shoes. Don't have kids. You can buy new shoes. Okay? You like my wife, your shoe size goes up. Very, very common in women when they're pregnant. Your feet grow because of all the growth hormone that's circulating around that's being shared with the fetus in those ways. Okay, my wife took it as a time for new shoes. So she loves shoes and bags, right? And those kinds of things. Anyway, so if we supplement, we get an increase in mass and strength. One of the things that it does is it really helps to kind of limit protein breakdown. So one of the other issues and the things that growth hormone and testosterone can be really, really good at is enhancing recovery. So I work out today and I break down some muscle tissue from working out. And then I give testosterone and I get back faster. I recover faster so I can come in and work out harder tomorrow in that particular way. It's sometimes difficult to tease out the effects of testosterone versus growth hormone or growth hormone by itself. If I give you testosterone, it tells the pituitary to make growth hormone. We can't always extricate those two things from each other. And then growth hormone causes the release of something called IGF-1. IGF stands for insulin-like growth factor, and it binds to receptors very similar to the insulin receptor. IGF-1 comes in a couple of variants, one of which is really, really important for hypertrophy and recovery because it interacts with satellite cells. You make IGF-1 in the liver and you make IGF-1 in muscle. I give you growth hormone, it makes liver and muscle IGF-1 go up. Okay? There's a special variant, though, called IGF-1 and it's E(c), this EC variant, that is commonly now called MGF or mechanogrowth factor. It is only made by muscles and it's only released in response to loading of a muscle. Okay? And so it's released in response to overload and stretch, and MGF plays a big role in turning on satellites. If you want to supplement, and I'm not encouraging you all to do this, IGF-1 or MGF, you have to inject it directly into a muscle that's just worked out. You cannot take it systemically. Because when you work out and you contract a muscle, you upregulate and make more receptors for IGF-1 and MGF-1 in those muscles. And you have to upregulate the receptors to be able to get the full effect of it. So if you take MGF, you got to inject it right into a muscle that's just working. You're not going to get the ability. Okay? And I'll show you guys a little bit of data about all of this. Hope we find this poor little kid. I really do. One, just because that's terrible. So no more alerts, please. So how do hormones work? You work out, hormones go up. You get a bigger testosterone increase in you by having you go run. You know that? Anna, you run a lot, right? If we were to all, and I'm sorry to do this to him, we all look at Hannah, we think Hannah takes steroids? Think she looks like a person who would take steroids? But I bet she gets as much, if not more, of an increase in testosterone relative to baseline than anybody else in class. She runs a bunch, okay? And yet, not ready for Muscle and Fitness magazine cover right now. A little work to do, okay? So, what's going on? Why is that the case? How do we explain all of that? Well, we know when you work out, no matter what, muscle contractions cause the release and upregulate the release of these hormones. Muscle contractions do. We think it is something about mechanical stress along the outer membrane of the muscle fibers that trigger the release of these hormones. Okay? So we need to generate force in that muscle. And if we really want to get mechanical stress, you need force and lengthening muscle action. So pick the heavy weight up and then lower the heavy weight down. Big load and some stretch. Okay? That seems to, for whatever reason, and we don't fully understand, it seems to cause the release of the hormones, and it also leads to an upregulation or making more receptors for those hormones in the muscle cells or in the muscle fiber cell rack. Okay. Now, there's also a metabolic component to all of this, and that's why if you run a bunch, you don't have to. You get a big testosterone increase, a big growth hormone increase, and it's meant, as we'll see next week, it's meant to regulate blood glucose levels, fat metabolism, energy supply, and those things. But if you do enough sort of metabolic triggers, it kind of counteracts some of this. Okay, but that's what we're going to get. So that's one of the reasons that we think lifting heavier weights or lifting to failure and adding eccentric contractions in as part of your thing is going to be good. Okay. This is also controversial. There's some evidence that acute hormone release after a bout of resistance training plays no role in the training effort. That if Brock gets X amount of testosterone, Kirby gets X less amount of testosterone, that has no effect on either of you being the one that has bigger muscle. There's some evidence of that. And there's also evidence like this. Okay. These are from a lab at the University of Alabama at Birmingham that's also arguably one of the best cellular muscle physiology labs in the world. And they're measuring, this is mechanogrowth factor messenger RNA synthesis at baseline, acute, and then after 16 weeks of resistance training. And they split people into non-responders, moderate responders, and large responders on how big their muscles got. Okay. So we're basically taking our people on kind of either in and in the middle of our hypertrophy responses. And what they found was non-responders here in black, moderate responders in white, biggest responders in gray. And here's how they group them out. It's called a cluster analysis where they group them out. Biggest increase, about 2,000 micrometer increase in muscle size versus 1,000 versus almost none. So when you do this and you look at all of these things, there may actually be some relationship between the acute change or the chronic change in expression of this, especially mechanogrowth factor hormone, and the amount of hypertrophy you get, which may be one of the genetic factors that plays a role. But then there's also evidence that says how much testosterone you release, how much growth hormone is it. Well, when you release some of it increase after doesn't actually matter. Okay. So hormones are important to a point. They become really important when you don't have them anymore. When men get into andropause, ladies, when you all get to menopause and estrogen falls. Okay? When we get to that point, that's one of the things that plays a big role in why muscle mass tends to decline with age. You get and become sarcopenic in your early to mid 50s. Okay. Which I am staring squarely in the face very, very soon. Okay. Let me try to run through the last couple of things here. I think we'll be able to. So I told you guys satellite cells are important. I told you guys that the mechanogrowth factor that activates them is really important. One of the reasons that we know this is if we put muscle cells, muscle fibers in a test tube or in a petri dish, okay, and we zap them with radiation, we can kill the stem cells, we can kill the satellite cells. We can then try to hypertrophy that muscle and we can give it stuff to make it get bigger, give it the signals. And so what you see here is this is what they call a synergist ablation model. It would be like me basically taking your quad and cutting 3 of your 4 knee extensor muscles. And you've only got one left to walk around on. So the one that's left, I leave you your medialis. I cut the other, the medialis is going to get really big. This is sort of their normal hypertrophy response. Okay. This has normal satellite cells. When they kill the satellite cells, the muscle shrinks. Here they kill the satellite cells and they do the ablation, and it also shrinks. So no satellite cells, and we get no hypertrophy whatsoever. Okay. No hypertrophy. This doesn't seem to be quite this pronounced in intact human muscle, but because of things like this, That's what we know, why we know that these are going to be really, really. Okay. Here's another sort of molecule that's really important called AKT. AKT, if you do 23andMe, it's why this is on here. If you do 23andMe, they'll look at you, they can tell you genetically how much AKT you have, how much your relative expression of AKT is going to be. This is an animal model where they make the animal genetically overexpress AKT. Okay. They bred the animals, they overexpress. Here's their extensor digitoral, their EDL muscle, which is actually going to be one of their plantar flexor muscles, and their soleus. And what they can do is they can look at their muscle weight and they can basically overexpress AKT by activating it with this, what they're calling TAM here, which I forget what it stands for. They can activate the AKT overexpression, and you'll see that they don't even have to work out, they just get bigger muscles. Okay. AKT is directly, it's also called protein kinase B, it's directly upstream of it. So we know that AKT activates. So if you ever get 23andMe, it should tell you something about AKT. So it can tell you what kind of potential you might have for getting bigger muscles. Okay. So, and I have this one here because you guys might actually run into this woman. This was 2001. Not the year some of y'all were born, a little bit before some of y'all. Her name is Sue Bodine. We've just hired Sue Bodine, now works at the health science. She works at what's called OMRF, it's the Office of something research or whatever. She is as big a deal in muscle physiology as anybody in our world. I cannot imagine what they gave her. She was at the University of Iowa. I cannot imagine what they gave her to get her to come here. But you might run across her. She basically discovered mTOR. And so what they know is, and the reason that we found mTOR is that it is a target of an antibiotic called rapamycin. And so if I give your muscle rapamycin, mTOR doesn't work. So give you the rapamycin, I have an exercise, I do something, you don't get hypertrophy, which is exactly what we're seeing here. The ones that are here, this is going to be, right, 7 days, 14 days. We are getting sort of compensatory hypertrophy model. So this is the make them work out, blast them with rapamycin, very, very little hypertrophy in comparison to all of these other. It is expressed in both fast and slow twitch fibers. Really, really, really seminal kind of thing that we discovered in exercise physiology. mTOR is important. mTOR is important. Something about what we do when we exercise is going to activate the hormone response. It's also going to activate AKT. It's going to activate these upstream signals of mTOR, and it's the mTOR that drives the increase in protein synthesis rates. Okay, so how does exercise activate mTOR? We don't really know. We know that when you eat protein, that activates mTOR. We know that when it gets bound, when you have testosterone and growth hormone and mechano growth factor, that also leads to this part of this process that activates mTOR. There's also something about what we call a mechanoreceptor. Something about sensing force on the sarcolemma also synergistically activates mTOR. You don't have to know any of the things that are on here. You don't have to understand the growth factor signal through PI3 kinase or any of these other sorts of things that are going to be kind of downstream here. Okay? None of this is going to matter. Although there is some cool stuff that's named really fun. When I was in y'all's age and I was doing molecular biology classes, I would be like, I always want to discover one so I can name it something cool like raptor, something like all of that. And there's this thing, it's called, there's a RAG, which I forget what RAG stands for, a RAG GTP enzyme. And so then they found a thing that regulates, so they just called it regulator, which I thought was kind of dumb, but you name it something really, really cool. There's all of these different things that go on here. mTOR then signals through something called P70S6 kinase. And then that is what activates and drives protein synthesis. Okay. I just want you to know mTOR. mTOR is important. Exercise activates mTOR. That's the important thing. Okay. All right, and we'll finish it off with this. Show this in health and fitness as well. Right? This is the Belgian blue bowl. It makes no myostatin. Myostatin is a protein that limits muscle growth. You all have myostatin. Some of you more than others. Okay? This Belgian blue bull has never lifted a weight in its life. And yet, he is real small. Okay? Because he doesn't make myostatin. We've removed one of the genetic limit things from all of them. Okay? And so there are humans that have very low or almost no myostatin. Here's this little baby that has no myostatin. I can tell you all from experience, 7-month-olds don't have visible vastus lateralis. They don't. They're just little balls of like Michelin tire man chub and stretch. Right? I miss that in many, many ways. But there are kids that have no myostatin. People who don't have any, who don't have any. Very often, the people in the high end of hypertrophy and kind of genetic kind of things, they don't have a lot of. You can check those. You want to fun exercise, get on your computer and Google myostatin dog, myostatin deficient mouse. You'll see these like poor like dogs, like these pit bulls that are just like, oh, these mice that look like they're just great big giant muscled up little mice and everything. So another one of the things you guys should be aware of. I am sure that there are people that are actively working on, if they haven't already, ways to block your myostatin. That's a way to have you get more hypertrophy. Don't take testosterone. We'll just give you something that'll block your myostatin. We'll work that way. What's that? Blocking. All right. That's pretty good. 2 minutes. Test on Monday. Question: do we want to try to do a study day or a study session or something before class on Monday? Zoom thing like Sunday evening or Monday morning? You guys tell me. Is there any interest in that? Zoom on Sunday? Or what time? Pardon? Whenever I say 3.
Maybe like 6 or 5.
Look, let me do this, guy. The evening on Sunday, like a little bit later, would be better for me. Okay? What I might actually do, if I can arrange my put on the bed night to be, I'll take like 2 straight days. We alternate nights if we have to sit with her when she falls asleep. Which is also why she's a time terrorist. Like 8 o'clock or something like that. What I can actually do is I can probably do the Zoom thing. I can put my headphones in and I can go and we can do it. I'll take my dog for a walk or something, get out of the house and we can kill them 3 birds with that way. And then on Monday, if you would like to do something before class, we can do that as well. I'll be here for, and we can meet at 12 and bring your lunch or something, or 11:30, whatever. I guess we can do something. Okay. So that's Monday. Have a good weekend. Make good choices. Study hard. All right. Okay.
So I thought I'm going to give us a answer.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, take care of
I don't know if it's like that. I don't know if it's that, but
like, I'm happy for us to do that, if you think that, you know, we'll just put you in one of the,
okay.
in one of the graduate offices or something here. I'm just coming to regular, I'm gonna take you in there.
Okay. Yeah, because I thought it was gonna be this first day I came, and then the 2 days that I skipped, like I couldn't even like. It's like, I was gonna text you, like,
Let me ask
Yeah.
you.
I actually had my relationship reaction to this medication. It was like a really rare, it was so I was home in Houston, luckily we were done with shooting and stuff. I was walking down the stairs and like, I don't like,
Remember,
I don't remember, yeah. So then I wake up, there's like mom in front of me, I'm like in my dining room, like on the food. Like, I did not even know. And then so I had a seizure there, they took me to ambulance, I had another seizure at the beginning. So for like the majority of like spring, I was like stay. But luckily, I don't do any of the HCS stuff in spring just because I'm like busy here. So like I was looking at my classes for like it was like 4 weeks really. So I got a little bit. And then I realized I was like, that's it. I'm okay now. Yeah. Yeah, so luckily, like when I went, I've been having like withdrawals. There's like 2 kinds of seizures, the kind where like you're at risk for the kind that was just a freak accident. I'm just on the freak accident side, because no one in my family had this feeling. So it was just really weird. Yeah, I actually like got it. Yeah, I got a seizure. I should be cleared for cheer, I should be cleared, by like playing football and stuff, so, but.
It's like working out for us.
Oh, I'm not even allowed.
They go out to.
Yeah, I tried to go on a walk and I like. I'm exaggerating, but yeah, and then I try out to the castle and the lights are like this, but 10 times brighter. And I like, usually I would just sit in the training room, because even like standing up. But. I'm not like that, like I like to do anything, so it's really unlikely.
Okay, well, come on Monday. If we need more time, not a problem. If you want to try, like, we can see you in my office, where I don't even use the overhead lights, I just have some lamps on.
Yeah.
Where it's much dimmer, if you think that would be helpful. You want to try it here, you're just like, it's not working, you know,
Okay.
not a problem.
Okay, I was also telling you in case they like email you.
No, I mean, if they email, I'm usually like, I don't like, you know,
Yeah.
people don't do this if you don't act like, you don't ask for more time if you don't really need more time.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you.
Of course, have a good weekend.